In the day is a translation of the Hebrew word beyom. It's the Hebrew preposition be attached to the Hebrew word yom. And so many translations translate it with the single word when. It's an adverbial, it's functioning as an adverbial prepositional phrase. That doesn't mean that the days in Genesis 1 weren't literal, just because that's not literal. Because in Genesis 1 we have a completely different construction. We have yom with a number. That's completely different from Genesis 2:4. And we see something very similar in the book of Numbers, chapter 7, where the temple, the tabernacle was built, and they had the offerings for the dedication of the tabernacle. And it says that the leaders of Israel offered the dedication offering for the altar when it was anointed. That word when is a translation of beyom, same word as in Genesis 2:4. But then from verse 12 onward, every 6 verses are basically saying the same thing, except changing the name of one of the leaders of Israel. So in verse 12 it says, "Now the one who presented his offering on the first day was Nahshon." That was the first literal day. And in verse 18, on the second day, Nathaniel. On the third day, Eliab. On the fourth day, etc. And then you get to verse 84, and it repeats what it said in verse 10. So when it uses beyom in verse 10 and verse 84, it's talking about the whole 12 days of sacrifice. But on each of the days, we have a numbered day. So it's the same kind of construction. And the fact that beyom is in Genesis 2:4 does not mean that the days numbered in Genesis 1 are not literal. They are literal. Have you ever heard this one? Too much happened on the 6th day to happen in 24 hours? An Old Testament professor at my seminary taught that. I don't know how he knew that, but let's look at what happened on the 6th day. I'm going to list for you everything that the Genesis text tells us happened. God created the land animals and the Garden of Eden. Now, could you tell me how long did it take God to do that? Could he have done it like that? Yeah, okay, so we'll count that as a second, just speaking liberally. God created Adam. Now let's see, how long does the text say it took God to do that? It doesn't say. So I think he could have done it in a second, right? So, well, that's 2 seconds now. God saw Adam's need. How long did it take for God to see Adam's need? There's another second. Here's an important thing. This Old Testament scholar said that it took a long time for Adam to recognize his need. Read the text. The text does not say Adam recognized his need. The text says God saw his need. Adam was oblivious. Then God put Adam to sleep. I got my wisdom teeth taken out when I was in high school. The dentist told me to count to 10. I got to 7 and I was gone. Didn't take God long to do that. And then God created Eve. How long did it take him to supernaturally create Eve from the rib of Adam? We're not talking very many seconds here. Okay, Adam tended the garden. Started to tend the garden. Actually, the text doesn't even tell us that. The text just tells us that God commanded him to tend the garden. And it wouldn't take very long for God to give that command. Less than 15 seconds to read that whole sentence that God said to Adam. So he started to tend. This Old Testament scholar, he was just imagining that the garden was huge. The Bible doesn't tell us how big the garden was. He's thinking of a state park, this Old Testament scholar. And then Adam named the animals and the birds. Well, this Old Testament scholar assumed that Adam was giving double Latin taxonomic names like Linnaeus gave. But the Bible doesn't say that. He could have been naming animals like my uncle named his cows. Bessie, Star, Blackie. Or he could have been just giving common names that his children would call the animals. Dog, cow, cat. Those words have nothing to do with the morphology, the physical shape of the animal. So I calculated once that Adam could lay on the ground eating grapes and name creatures that God brought to him. The text doesn't say he had to go out and find them all. God brought them to him. And he could have named 3,000 kinds of animals effortlessly in 10 hours while he was eating grapes. There was plenty of time for all the activities to happen on day 6 in 24 hours. Genesis 1 and 2 are contradictory accounts of creation. Ever heard that one? People who say this just haven't read the text. Genesis 2 has no mention of the creation of the following things: light on day 1, dry land and plants on day 3, the sun, moon, and stars, or the expanse on day 2, sun, moon, and stars on day 4. They're not mentioned in Genesis 2. Sea creatures are not mentioned in Genesis 2. And the creation of creeping things are not mentioned. What Genesis 1 is the wide-angle zoom, the wide-angle lens view of the whole creation week. And what Genesis 2 is the telephoto zoom lens view of some events on day 6. They're not contradictory accounts of creation. A very famous Christian leader I was speaking to a number of years ago. If I mention his name, I imagine that most of you would know his name, but I'm not going to say it. But he asked me to share with him 10 reasons why I rejected millions of years. And we talked for an hour and only got through 3 points because it became a discussion. But at the end of our discussion, he said, Terry, and he's a godly man, Terry, it doesn't matter to me if God created in 6 seconds, 6 days, or 6 million years. I believe God could do anything. That sounds like a great statement of faith. And I wasn't thinking fast enough on my feet, but after I walked away from that meeting, I thought, this godly, sincere Christian leader who's led more people to Christ than I've ever witnessed to didn't realize what he was saying. Because what he was really saying when he said that was, Terry, it doesn't matter what God said. Because God didn't say he created in 6 seconds. He didn't say he created in 6 million years or 6 billion years. He said he created in 6 days. And so it does matter what God said. And it does matter what we believe. And so the Bible clearly teaches a literal 6-day creation about 6,000 years ago. Though I still love my young earth creationist brothers who believe in 10 or 12,000 years. I'd really encourage you to get the resources that confirm this and show that the idea of millions of years is a lie. Those years never existed. God's word is true.